I think Ed Wood is one of the most important filmmakers of the 20th century. Stop. When I say that, I don't mean it in relation to technical skill, because obviously, there are some problems. What I mean is what they represent is far more important, the idea of following your passion and making the movies you want, even if it only appeals to you. It's a creative creed I've always taken to heart, that even before thinking of satisfying an audience of many, you must first satisfy an audience of yourself. I've also always felt that if you're willing to look past some of the sillier elements in Wood's work,
Hold the string! Hold the string!
you can find elements that are incredibly honest. Wood puts so much of themselves into their work, and it's impossible to engage with the material on its own level without acknowledging things about the artist. Even something as often joked about as the Bela Lugosi footage in Plan 9 from Outer Space can be viewed as Wood paying tribute to the friend and creative partner they love to work with. Unfortunately, Wood never really got to make all the films they wanted. Securing funding was always a problem. Most notably, one of Wood's films, Night of the Ghouls, wasn't given a proper release until 6 years after their death, as Wood was not able to pay the film lab tasked with handling it. Thankfully, film historian and Ed Wood fan Wade Williams located the film and paid off the long overdue bills, finally releasing it to the public. Today we're talking about a similar situation, a film Ed Wood wrote, but never had the money to make until roughly a decade later when it would be made without their involvement and be released by TOEI, the same company responsible for releasing Dragon Ball and Super Sentai. This is Venus Flytrap. Or Body of the Prey, or The Revenge of Dr. X. There's no character in this movie named Dr. X. We're gonna stick with Venus Flytrap. Honestly, the fact we have this film at all is just as much a miracle as us having Night of the Ghouls. This film was apparently discovered in a warehouse with absolutely no credits or documentation, and on the actual film they had credits of an entirely different movie spliced into the print. If I had to guess how this happened, that as importing foreign co-productions was a lucrative business at the time, that in an attempt to get these films ready for release as quickly as possible, Venus Flytrap got the wrong credits spliced in. Once this was discovered, they placed the film aside to be fixed later, and it just never was. Again, this is all conjecture, but I feel like this is a solid guess. Now, for the film itself. Dr. Bragan, an overworked NASA scientist with an interest in botany, is suggested to go on vacation to Japan by his assistant. On his way to the airport, he harvests a sample of Venus Flytrap at the suggestion of a greasy snake man.
Well,
Howdy!
hello there.
Heard you chugging in there. Heard you honking and hollering and everything.
When he arrives in Japan, he meets his assistant's cousin Noriko, who both gives him access to a greenhouse at a hotel in the mountains and agrees to be his assistant as she also is experienced in botany. Upon arriving to the hotel, they both come into contact with the caretaker of the estate, who loves to skulk around and play the organ. I think he's supposed to be like the hunchback assistant trope, but I genuinely can't tell. They make a comment about him liking to work in seclusion so he doesn't get weird looks, but I'm having difficulty noticing anything. Once Dr. Bragan hits the greenhouse, he goes full mad scientist mode, splicing together plant DNA to create a new form of man to prove that all life, including human life, descended from plants. He dubs his creation Sectivorous. However, his creation immediately begins dying, and neither Bragan nor Noriko can figure out why. However, when one of the caretaker's puppies wanders too close to the weak Sectivorous, they are devoured and the creature regains its strength by morning. From this point, Bragan begins feeding it live prey, but his creation still won't walk. In an attempt to coax movement out of the creature, Bragan steals blood from a sanitarium and injects it into the creature. The first sign of the creature attaining the ability to walk is when the caretaker's dog is killed, while it is tied out of the reach of Sectivorous. Bragan and Noriko attempt to take watch of the creature, but it releases some form of spore, knocking the two unconscious. Sectivorous then steps out of its pod and begins terrorizing the village below. Bragan and Noriko wake up and immediately go after the creature. Bragan attempts to lure out his creation with a goat, assuring it that he has no plans to destroy it and he merely wants to continue his work. Sectivorous, however, has grown far too large to be satisfied by animals and lunges at Bragan, and the two tumble down the mountain into a river of molten lava. Did I mention there were volcanoes?
Asama, an active volcano.
So up top, this film is very obviously a take on the pop culture image of Frankenstein. Scientist wanting to prove something fundamental about life, has a hunchback assistant, creation scene with lightning, someone says it's alive.
It's alive!
And at the end, the doctor dies alongside his creation, a victim of his own hubris. Also, this film, despite them not actively working on it, has all the hallmarks of an Ed Wood production, from liberal use of stock footage, often the same stock footage, and long pseudoscientific monologues. Now, when I was going over the plot, it may have made this movie sound fairly short. This film is an hour and a half long, and most of it is padding. Most of the film is spent building Sectivorous, and there are so many scenes of characters just walking around. So many of the dialogue scenes are just repeating information that has already been established. There's an inexplicable nude scene in the middle where the entire point is that the protagonists couldn't find an underwater plant, and now these half-naked girls need to look. Honestly par for the course for the era this film came out in, but it took me by surprise. If anything, that might be indicative of how little they changed from Wood's original screenplay, because this definitely doesn't feel like a film that this should be in. The acting and dialogue can be strange. Sometimes it feels like the tone of voice doesn't match the events, or the subject of conversation changes extremely quickly.
Are you unhappy?
On the contrary, I couldn't have designed it any better for my plans.
Come, let me show you the hotel.
Good.
The performance that stands out the most is James Craig, who plays Dr. Bragan, who will just fly off the handle.
I want the facts. The facts, do you hear? Paul, have the necessary corrections made and bring me the reports. And get those things out of my sight. Get them out of my...
You've got to keep your strength.
Will you stop harping on me? I am damn well old enough to look after myself. I've been doing it for a good number of years. Those crazy villagers want to kill you, but we'll fool them. You and I. You both belong to High Ridge. You won't follow us there. We'll escape, you and I.
Like, it's so uncalled for, and you never know what innocuous thing is gonna set it off. The camera work is... I don't want to say lazy, but I don't want to say shot like a stage play, as that would imply there aren't really any cuts. There are, but only when they have to. If they can do an entire scene from one angle, they will. The prevalence of these single shot scenes decrease as the film goes on, but there's still enough that it's noticeable. The soundtrack is inappropriate, to say the least. It's hard to describe. Also, they use Toccata and Fugue as a stinger every time the caretaker shows up. But again, he's not the villain, he's just a dude. Now, I focused a lot on the negatives, so I want to end with a positive. I genuinely do love Sectivorous' design. It's so different, like it doesn't feel beholden to much design convention. It just is. It's got something like a tail, and you only get to see it once as it curls up against its body, and I kinda love that. This is a monster that feels like the culmination of Wood's legacy in science fiction. Overall, I don't hate the movie. I think it was going to be unlikely I'd dislike it under most circumstances just because of my affinity for Wood's work. But honestly, it's not that engaging, and with all the padded walking montages, I doubt it'd be even fun to riff with a group of friends unless you were fast-forwarding through. You could probably edit this film down to about 30 minutes and get a much more engaging product. But I still think it's an interesting piece of film history surrounding a filmmaker I do believe should be given some genuine consideration. So if you're a fan of their work, give it a watch. I hope you find something in it that I didn't. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me directly, you can support me through Patreon, where all my supporters get regular updates of my work. If you like comic book and or Sonic lore, but right now mostly Sonic lore, you can follow me on TikTok. And if you want to see my general nonsense, follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching.